So this is a recording of the Amud on Yud Aleph Amud Beis. We are on Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, about 10 lines from the bottom of the Amud. So the Gemara says, Omar Shmuel. So Shmuel says, Kol hayeshev b'tainis nikra chote. Anybody who sits in tainis, anybody who fasts, meaning not a fast that is required, not one of the four tainiyos of Shavasar B'Tammuz, Tisha B'Av, Tzom Gedaya, Sar B'Teves, not one of those fasts, but somebody takes upon himself additional fasts. They're called a chayte, a sinner. Savar ki hay Tana. Shmuel must hold like the Tana that says, the Tana learned the Brisa, or Belezer HaKappa Beribi, or Belezer HaKappa the Great said, Ma tam aloi mevachipa alav me'asher chot ala nafesh. What does it mean in Pasuk? The Pasuk says that the Nazir, we just had it in this past week's parsha, v'chipar alav me'asher chot ala nafesh, that he's going to get a kapara from the fact that he sinned on the soul. What does that mean? V'chi be'eze nefesh chot hazeh. What kind of a sin did this person do with the soul that he is having to get a kapara? Says Shmuel, says Reb Elazar Kappa, El Shetzir Atzim Min Hayayin. He was mitzvah himself. He prevented himself from having wine. And so therefore, as a result of that, he is going to, he is going to, excuse me, he is going to be called the chayte. So again, according to Shmuel, a nazir, somebody who's abstaining from wine, is called a chayte because of the fact that he's being mitzvah himself. And the Torah says, "V'chipar alav ma'asher chatal hanafesh." He has to get a kapara for the fact that he sinned on his soul. What kind of a sin? The sin of being mitzvah oneself, of holding oneself back from enjoying wine. Says the Gemara, "V'aloi dvarim kal v'chomer." Is it not a pasuk kal v'chomer? Ma zeh shelo yitzir atzmei el min hayayin nikra chayte marach. Somebody who was mitzvah himself only from wine, and nevertheless he's still called a chayte. Somebody's going to mitzvah himself from many more things. Is he not going to for sure be considered a chayte? Obviously, he will be. Now, this is not going to be taken lying down. There is another fundamental opinion that is in disagreement with Shmuel. That's the opinion of Rabbi Lezer. This Nazir is called a Kadesh, a holy person. What do we mean? Why is it called a holy person? Says the Gemara, Kadesh, Shenemar, Kadesh, Gadel Parasar. He's called a Kadesh because the pasuk says that he'll be holy, right? The growing from his hair will be holy. Somebody who's only holding himself back from one thing is called a Kaddish. Somebody's holding himself back from a lot of things. Wouldn't he for sure be considered a Kaddish? Wouldn't he for sure be considered a great person? So we have here a fundamental dispute between Shmuel and Rebbe Lezer as to whether somebody who's been Sarah Atzmim in Ayayin is called a Chayte or called a Kaddish. According to Shmuel, is a Chayte. According to Rebbe Lezer, he's a Kaddish. Says the Gemara, Ul Shmuel ha'ikri Kaddish. In fact, the Gemara, but what is Shmuel going to do? He's calling this guy a Chayte, but at the end of the day, doesn't the pasuk call him a Kaddish? The pasuk says, Kaddish ye gadel perasar resha. So Shmuel answers, Hahu agidu parakoi. That's going on the here. Kadesh ye gadel parasar roshay. What's Kadesh? The gadel para, the growth of the hair, the locks, the long locks that the guy has or the woman has now. That's what's Kadesh, but not that the person himself is Kadesh. Just the hair has a din of kedusha on it. So now the Gemara asks Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Lezer, Hanikra Chayte, Rabbi Lezer, you're saying that this person's a Kaddish, but the Torah is calling him a Chayte. It says, V'chipar lo mashachot ala nafesh. And for the Gemara, who deserve nafshe? No, he's not a Chayte inherently, But he did something wrong in getting himself tummy, right? La'avil ima la. He's not supposed to become tummy to anybody from his family. So the fact that he did means a chayta, at least with regards to becoming tummy, but not with regards to the general precept of somebody who's a nazir. That person's a kaddish. So at this stage of the Gemara, what's clear is that we have a fundamental dispute between Shmuel and Rabbi Lezer, if whether or not a nazir is considered a kaddish or a chayta, and what seems to be is that this will further develop into a wider machlekes because the Gemara is saying that if we're going to call the guy a kaddish on just holding himself back from some wine, then alas kama kama, if somebody held himself back from a lot of things, it'll be a kaddish. And according to Shmuel, that he's a chayta, he's being called a chayta, just hold himself back from a stickle of wine. Imagine if he holds himself back from a lot of things, what kind of a chayta is going to be called? So, before we go any further, just want to point out that um, I just want to point out that the psukim that are used here are a little odd because we have another pasuk that talks about Kadesh, not just Kadesh Yegadol Peres HaRosha, which is the pasuk that Rabbi Eliezer wants to bring a riot to himself. We have another pasuk, the pasuk says Kol Yemei Nizrai, Kadesh Hu Hashem. All the days of his Nazir, he's going to be a Kadesh to Hashem. Not talking about the here now, it's talking about the Nazir himself, the person. So why is Rabbi Eliezer running to the pasuk of Kadesh Yegadol Pera? So this is a question of Blai Shver on this question. I don't understand Rabbi Eliezer why he picked this pasuk of Kadesh Yegadol Pera, which is obviously a much weaker pasuk than this other one that says Kol Yimei Azir Kadesh Hu Hashem. He's the Kadesh, not the Seir. We have the same question on Shmuel. Shmuel says a chayte. Why is it a chayte? V'chipor lo me'asher choto al nafesh. V'chipor lo me'asher choto al nafesh. The reason you're a chayte is because of the fact that the pasuk says that you sinned me'asher choto al nafesh. You sinned on the soul. And Rabbi Eliezer has a good point, saying yes, he sinned because he became tamei. But there's another pasuk that Shmuel could have used to say that is a shtegel chayte, because every nazir, when their Naziris finishes, is required to bring korban chatas. The pasuk says by the Nazir, Kol Yemei, I'm sorry, Acharei Melois Yemei Nizrai, right? He has to bring what? He has to bring a korban. He has to bring korban chatas. Every Nazir, even if they finished their term of Naziris without ever becoming Tamei, they have to bring korban chatas. For a chatas for what? A chatas presumably means a sin. What's the sin? So Shmuel has a good right. If a guy finished the term of his Naziris, he never became Tom, and he still has to bring Korban Chatas. Chatas on what? What was the Chayta on? Presumably, the Chatas is needed because it was Chayta on the fact that it's Tzir Atzmai. Why doesn't Shmuel bring this pasuk? I don't know. So I have a question both on Shmuel and Rabbi Eliezer. Why the psukim that they bring are the weaker psukim? They're in Parashat Naso, bring the stronger psukim. That's number one. Number two. L'maisa, this dispute between Shmuel and Rabbi Eliezer has massive ramifications. Halacha l'maisa, in other words, to this very day, the reverberations of this dispute are still around with us. If you look at the Rambam, the beginning of the third paragraph of Hilchos Deis, the Rambam brings the Yerushalmi in the Durham, Parak Tes Halacha Aleph, that the Gemara over there says, "Lo yachal masha asa l'cha Torah." It's not enough what the Torah asks you, now we're going to come along and take up more Isurim. Therefore, for the Rambam, it's 100% that we go with Shmuel. It's not a question. It's 100% you're Mitzayir Hatzmim and Ayayin, you're doing something wrong. It's not necessary. Sure, sometimes somebody has a moment or whatever, maybe they have a problem with the drinking, so they become a Nazir, fine. But as an ideal, no. And the Ramban disagrees. The Ramban in Parshas Naso is very vehement about this and says, no, a Nazir is a Kaddish. Rabbi Eliezer is right, not a Shmuel. But if Rabbi Eliezer is right, so the Ramban has to answer, well, why does he have to bring, every Nazir has to bring a korban chatas, even if they didn't come tamei? A chatas for what? So the Ramban comes up with a big chiddush that it's not mentioned here. Says the Ramban, he has to bring a korban chatas because of the fact that he did not continue his Naziris. He stopped the Naziris early. What gave you the right to stop it? And this is in accordance with the Shita of the Ramban that's well known. The beginning of Parashas Kedoshim, Kadesh Atzim Chol Mutalach. Person should take stock of what is able to do, mitzvah Torah law. And there's a lot of stuff you could do, so cut stuff out. That's not called a chayta, that's called a kaddish. Kedoshim too, it's a mitzvah. The Rambam, I'm not sure if he's going to go as far as I'm about to say, but I'll give you an example. The Gemara in the end of Kedushin in the Yerushalmi, the last Gemara says, different rabbis would attempt to have, special fruit and various things. Why? Because La'as Lavai, HaKadosh Baruch is going to be done, Kol Ma Shara Einai V'lo Yizon, right? Anything that the eye saw, but didn't have any satisfaction from. Meaning, it's like the famous story of Shamshon and Frau Hirsch going to the Alps. Why? Because when I die, he says, the Rebbe Shalom is going to say to me, Shamshon, no, did you see my Alps? Right? You have to have a hana. Hashem made a wonderful world. You have to have enough in the world. This idea of having enough in the world, or pulling yourself away from that enough in the world, is an achos between Shmuel and Rebbe Lezer. Are you a chayta if you pull yourself away from the world? That's mutter to you. Or you're a kaddish if you pull yourself away. As we can see, this machlekes, which is also a machlekes Tanan, is a machlekes among the Rishonim, and it's a machlekes even to this very day. Today's the Gemara. So Zod the Gemara last line on Yud Aleph Amid Aleph. Zod the Gemara, me Omer Blazer Hachin. Does Blazer really say that a Nazir is a Kaddish? The Omer Blazer, but doesn't Blazer also say Lo'ilam Yimad Adam Atzmai? A person should judge himself as you turn the page to Yud Aleph Amid Beis. A person should always judge himself. Gilu Kaddish, showing b'seich man. A person should judge himself like he's got something holy, special, deep inside of himself, and therefore he shouldn't hurt it, which by definition means he shouldn't be fasting, which by definition means that he is not a kaddish. He shouldn't be doing this, according to the opinion of Rabbi Lezer. But inside, in your innards, is mamish kaddish already, and you will not come into the city. I should note here that Rashi says, I'm not really sure what this has to do with the pasuk. What it has to do, this pasuk, Rashi is understanding it in the second Rashi on the page with the Gemara, but just on the level of Bekir B'cha Kadosh Le'ava Be'ir, that your insides are going to have to be holy before I come to the city. So Rashi says Le'ava Be'ir Shal Mailo Ad She'evne Yushalayim Shal Mata. I'm not going to come into the Yushalayim Shal Maila until the Yushalayim Shal Mata is built. Or Mizba Alma, it's just a beautiful remez. So if you go back to Hayam and Aleph, we had this. Not the Gemara, but the Gemara brought down this pasuk B'kibbutz Kadosh, Le'over Be'ir. So the Muslim Shem B'kibbutz Kadosh Le'over Be'ir. Amalei Hafim Rabbi Yechon Kadosh Baruch Hu Le'over B'Yushalayim Shal Ma'ila. I'm not going to come to Yerushalayim Shal Ma'ila until Yerushalayim Shal Mata is built, which then becomes, as I mentioned then, I think, the more brachas pemtes on the pasuk of Banu Yerushalayim Hashem Nitzchei Yisrael Yichanes. The Amos had Banu Yerushalayim Hashem Moshe Shebnei Yisrael Yikanes. That is to say, what is the order of operations? When is Hashem going to build Yerushalayim Shal Ma'ila? Only after Yerushalayim Shal Mata is built. We have to do our part first, and then Hashem will respond. And so, again, the question that we're asking on Belezer is, Belezer, you're saying that a person who fasts is a Kaddish, but we also know, we have a member from you that says that a person has to always be made in himself, he has to always see himself, measuring within himself, Kilu Kaddish, that he has something holy, special inside of himself, and he shouldn't be harming it, he shouldn't be hurting it, so therefore he shouldn't be fasting additional fasts that are not mandated in Torah. So that the Gemara like Kasha the Matzi Litzuri Nafshe. It's an afkamina between being mitzvah yourself and you have the ability to do so without issue, and the ability, and the other possibility is somebody can't be mitzvah himself. He doesn't have the ability and nevertheless is mitzvah himself. So now there's Rav Lezer is saying, when do I say that somebody's a kaddish when he fasts? That's a situation where he's able to inside nafshe and doesn't have any reverberations or repercussions that are negative. When do I say it says that somebody who is fasting is not doing the appropriate thing, that somebody's not able to inside nafshe, doesn't have the ability, doesn't have the wherewithal to fast. She's taking upon himself a fast, it's going to have a lot of negative repercussions. That person is better, he shouldn't fast. I'm not sure if Lezer will call him, but better he shouldn't be fasting. Okay. Now, before we go any further, we have to do Taisvis on Yud Aleph. So turn the page back to Yud Aleph from Yud Aleph on the bottom Taisvis. Taisvis here is bothered because Taisvis says that we have a Gemara. The Gemara Bava Kama Tzadi Aleph tells us that if somebody is chayvul ba'atzmai, right, if somebody is chayvul in themselves, is rashoy, they're permitted to do so. And Shmuel says, what does it mean? Somebody's chayvul ba'atzmai. Somebody's chayvul ba'atzmai is like taking on a tinus. Somebody's taking on a tinus as though he's hurting himself. So Taz says, mashma, that if we're saying that somebody who is chayvul ba'atzmai, which Shmuel is saying means tinus, we're saying that that's rashoy, that's permitted. So then it can't be a chayta, says Taisvis. Then how could you call a person a chayta? Now, without Taisvis, I would have said, I don't know, why is it a problem? Why can't the person on the one hand be a chayta and still be rashoy to do so? You shouldn't equate the two. You could say that, no, if you do this, you're allowed to do it. But it's not ideal what you're doing. It's not ideal what you're doing. It's permitted. You're able to be chayv ba'atzma, you're able to hurt yourself, you're able to fast, misagif the body, sure. But it doesn't necessarily mean, if I say to you that that's considered somebody who's chayv ba'atzma, somebody who's fasting, that is therefore not a chayta. Let him be a chayta, and at the same time that he's a chayta, let him also be a permitted to do this. Maybe we would circumscribe the situations. Maybe somebody has a problem with food. Maybe not every person. Maybe somebody who specifically has an issue with food. Maybe such a person is more right. But anyhow, Taisus goes a different route. Taisus says that when Shmuel says that the person is a chaytim, doesn't really mean he's a chaytim. So according to like Taisus is learning, yes, you can say the person is a chayta to a degree, but it's not a huge chayta because at the end of the day, it's a big mitzvah of fasting. Mikol Mokim says mitzvah she'oisa tainus. It's a mitzvah because he's making a tainus, and that's Goli Yosem and Aver. That's bigger than the Aver of fasting. And Taisa proves it from the fact that how do we know that the person is allowed to be making these vows about Naziros? Because it's sort of Saita Bekukula, and the Gemara tells us on Saita Beis, Saita Bekukula Yazi Hasim and Ayai. So Taisa says, Shmuel says, that's the shtickle achet. It's a shtickle achet. In other words, the same way the Gemara qualifies Rebbe Lezer. Rebbe Lezer doesn't literally mean that every single person who fasts is a kaddish. Only if somebody has really the ability to do so, without any negative repercussions or ramifications. So too, we want to limit Shmuel. And Taisa is limiting Shmuel to say, look, you're not a chayta always. You're a chayta only in a situation, says Taisa, a shtickle, a little bit. But there's a big mitzvah fasting that you are being Mekayim. Again, like we had in the thesis yesterday about which sounds from Rish Lakish as Pashut Aser, thesis, maybe it's just a midas chasidus because of Levi. So again, we have this thesis over here saying the clear lashon of Shmuel is the chayta. So thesis doesn't really mean a real chayta. It's like sas chayta, it's something small, a shemichik, an epis. So that is the turn the page back to your alphabet base. That is the one until now. So now we go to Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish Omar Nigra Chassid. Rish Lakish says that a person who fasts is called a Chassid. Shneimar Germel Nafshay Ish Chesed. Somebody who is being Germel Nefesh, somebody who is sort of weaning his body off, it's called an Ish Chesed V'Eichesh Erei, and it harms himself. So in other words, the way the Rashi is learning this Gemara, Rish Lakish is saying that somebody who's messiah himself with Taniyos, he is a chassid. Taisa says, I don't like it. Taisa in fact learns just the opposite. Gimel nafshi ish chesed. Rish Lakish is saying, who's a chesed? Who's a chesed? Someone who's gimel nafshi ish chesed. Somebody who's acting on himself. Says Tosis in the second Tosis Pirish, Shegema Chesel Nafshay. He's weaning himself off of hurting himself. In other words, he's being Gemel Chesed to himself. He's doing kindness to himself. How? How's he doing kindness to himself? Because he's not fasting. She'einanu mis'ana nikra chassid. Somebody who doesn't fast is called a chassid. Now, this way of learning Taisvis, which is opposite of Rashi, so Taisvis is explaining that why is the person called a chassid? He's called a chassid because he's being gemel nafshe. He's being nice to his body. He's not being misagif with fasts. He's treating his body like a palace that it is. He's treating it nicely. So in such a situation, we're going to call the person a chassid. And now the end of the pasuk makes more sense. Va'echa nafshe achzor. If somebody's going to hurt his body, he's called an achzor. Now we understand why. Right? We're not talking simzach. Right? So according to Rashi learns, you have to basically say Gam Nafshi Shchas that somebody who's fasting is fasting, making his body fast. He's a somehow Gam Nafesh. So then why is Va'icha She'ere Achzor? Why is somebody's Masagif himself called an Achzor then? Right? That part is not clear. Why such a person would be considered an Achzor if um the object of fasting is a fantastic thing. So that we have to leave as a question. I'm not 100% sure. That's all I'm going to go with Taisvis. The Gemel Nafshi Ishchosin means that you're not fasting. You've been Gemel Nefesh to your body by not fasting. Yeah. Here's the Gemara. Amar of Sheshes. Hi, Bar Beirav Yosef Betanisa. The yeshiva students who are sitting and fasting, Lechol Kabbalah Shirus, let the dogs eat their lunch. In other words, they're doing the wrong thing. They have to focus on their learning. And you can't focus on your learning when you're too busy fasting. Too many naps, too many inabilities to concentrate, too many headaches, migraines, etc. Amar Yirmi Bar Abba, Ein Taina Siba Bava El Tishba Bavad. It says already notes we already had before. There's no real tiny Siba in Bavel because it's such a lush area. They never have to fast except for the Arba, fast that we mentioned. They never really have to fast during the year for rain because they had tons of rain, as Taisa says. So Rabbi Yirmi Bar Abba is saying that that's the only fast. Ain't time to see above El Tish B'Av. No other fasts, right? Um, Meaning that you don't take on any additional fast. You don't take on any additional fast for the rain, but get the impression that what he's additionally hinting at is that we don't need more fasts. We're good. You know, that's enough. It's sufficient. You don't have to go running for other ones. Amar Rabbi Yirmi Bar Abba Amar Rish Lakish. Now Rabbi Yirmi Bar Abba quotes Rish Lakish himself. Ein Talmid Chacham Asher Leisha B'Tainiyas. A Talmid Chacham was not permitted to sit in Tainiyas and Leisha B'Mayim B'Lechus Shemayim because it's going to stay there for a long time and it's going to be Memayim to B'Lechus Shemayim. So better off than no yeshiva kids should be fasting at all. Yeah. Okay. Now let's continue on the Gemara. So the Gemara says now the two dots on your alpha and base. The Mishnah told us that once the first series of fasts on the rains were over, so you can come home and eat. Amar Zira, Amar Avuna. Zira said the name of Avuna as follows: Yachid shekibel of Tainus, a Yachid that was mekabel upon himself a Tainus. Right, so he's mekabel Tainus the day before. Then that night he's eating like fressing like a pig. So L'machar, who misbal tefillas tainus, he is able to daven, right, the tefillah of tainus. He can say Anenu, right, in Shemona Esrei, because he was Mekabel tainus the day before, even though he ate that night. Continues the Gemara, Lon b'tanisa, what happens if the guy, right, he was Mekabel to fast on, I don't know, the 15th day of Sivan, and so the night of the 15th he's eating, but the day of the 15th he fasts, and he was tired, he had huge headaches, so he goes to sleep. And he wakes up the morning now of the 16th. So the Gemara is discussing this idea. Says the Gemara, if somebody fell asleep on the night of the 15th of Sivan, And he didn't have a chance to break fast. And he wake up now in the morning. So he fell asleep. Lom b'tanis, ain't no special tainus. He does not daven the tefillah of the tainus. He doesn't daven that. He does not daven the tefillah of the tainus. Why not? Yesterday he did daven the tefillah of the tainus. What happened today? That's what the one wants to figure out. So I'm Rav Yosef, Mike of Rav Huna. What does Rav Huna hold? That he says that the person who wants to sleep while he was fasting is not able to stand the next morning. Svirale ein misanan l'shayis. Maybe he holds that you're not able to fast for hours. In other words, for a partial day. And therefore, if you can't fast for a partial day, then obviously you would not be able um, to say anenu. You don't have a real fast day. By Dilma Misanan l'shayis, you know, Misanan l'shayis and spell to that's time. So maybe there's a technical point. But really, you are able to Misanan for sure. So in other words, you could fast. I'm only fasting 5 hours today. Right. But by Dilma Sanan Lashoyes, Ramasan Lashoyes, ain't a mispat vestin. But just because you're able to make upon itself a partial tightness, doesn't mean they say anedo on that. And that is only for full on tanesim, not for these partial tanesim. That's the worst chakira. Which way does Rav Huna hold? Answers the Gemara. Rav Huna Misan Lashoyes. It must be that what Rabbi says must be the Rav Huna held is that you are able to make a partial fast. And not only is it Misan Lashon, it's Misan Lashon is Mispal Tfilas Tainus. And not only that, but somebody who's what Misan Lashon is going to make a tefillah of a tainus. Even on a partial fast, is going to say Anenu. So now we have a question. If that's really what Rav Huna holds, then why over here is this person, are we being told, cannot say Anenu the next morning when it was Lom B'Tanisai? On that, the Gemara says. So Amalei Abaylo Elam said Rav Huna Misan L'Shosh and spelled Tfilas Tainus. But B'Shani Hachad Ika Shosh to Laliad Loi Kibol Oleh Meikar. But the difference over here is that the reason he's not saying Anenu in the morning was because there's no Kabbalah's Tainus for this Tainus. Sure, it's absolutely the case that you're able to be Misana partial fast called a Tainus for Shosh. Yes. And it's certainly true that if someone's doing a Tainus for Shosh, then he's able to say Anenu. Also true. But here we're going a step further. We're not only saying that he's mispal. I'm sorry, we're not only saying that he was fasting in the morning, but we're saying he was fasting in the morning. I don't have any Kabbalah's Tainus for this morning. He had a Kabbalah's Tainus on the 14th or the 15th, but he didn't have a Kabbalah's Tainus on the 15th or the 16th. So as a result, he's just went to sleep, and now he woke up in the morning fasting. He can't say Anenu. But not because we don't hold of a partial fast, not because we don't hold that a partial fast can't get Anenu. All that could be the case, and we still wouldn't do it here. Why? Because there's no Kabbalah's Tainus here. Just fell asleep. Yeah. So we're up to the Gemara. It's not just it's not fast Tainus for Shani Hakad. You can show us the like Kibbul of Meikar. He didn't take on these days. Right. Before we get to the next Gemara, just mention this big thesis here of Lam B'Tanisai. So, maybe we start out with the thesis even before that, of Yachid Shekiba Olav Tainus. So Taisus points out, why are we talking about Yachid? A Yachid Shekiba Olav Tainus. That we're saying if a Yachid is Mikal upon himself a Tainus, so now we want to understand about it. He's able to eat the night before. Is he saying Anenu? Is he not saying Anenu? This is, I don't understand why we're talking about Yachid. Is it different when the Tzibur is doing the same thing? Taisus vibes off on this as Tzarchin. That's the next Taisus. Lamed Tanisa. Taisus brings down the Bahag. It's a big Taisus. We'll not have a chance to go through the whole thing. But Taisus brings down the Bahag. And the Bahag holds a very interesting Shita. Says the Bahag, at the end of the day, the Chazan says Anenu by Shachris. We don't. Why not? Says the Bahag, because by Shachris, we don't know yet if we're going to eat or not. It's still early in the day. We don't want to be liars. So best not to say Anenu till Mincha. But the Chazan, he could say Anenu. Why is the Chazan saying Anenu? Explains the Bahag, because of the fact that, or I should say, Taisus says, the reason that the Chazan says Anenu by Shachris is because of the fact that that it will either be a situation where there's got to be at least some amount of people that are otherwise fasting. Very interesting. The bottom of this text is quotes the Torah Chaim, but they put that in brackets because that would be seemingly very odd to quote from the son of the Rush in the Taisus. Seems a little odd. In any event, we're not doing here the formation of Taisus for the moment, so we won't go any further into that. But Taisus says that the reason that the Baal Shachar says Anenu is because of the fact that you're gonna need a reminder for the crowd. The Torah Chaim in Sim Tav Kuf Chav Hey Tav Kuf Samach Hey, the Torah writes that the reason that the Shah about Shachar says Anenu is because for sure somebody in the crowd that's going to be fasting. Okay, so either a reminder or because of the fact that you know that there's for sure going to be people around that are going to be fasting. Okay, so now we're up to the Gemara. Very very interesting story. Mar Ukva Iklu the Ginzik. Mar Ukva came to Ginzik, and then in the town they asked him, "Boy, my name is San Lashos or Amos San Lashos." They asked him. There's such a concept, like we just said before, of partial fasting. Well, have you? They didn't know. Kankanen and Shel Nachem Asuna Mitaran are the casks of the guy mutter or aser. Have you? He again just simply didn't know. The Mashimish Meshika Shivas Yimei Milum. What did Moshe been addressed in there in the 70s of the inauguration? We just had in Parshas Nasai. Again, Vayibiyam Chalis Moshe Lahakim As Hamishkan. Um, I don't really understand this question. Like at the end of the day, we just say "Might hava hava," right? The Gemara in Yuma Hayim base, the Gemara says, "How did Aaron, the sons get dressed?" Kate said, "Bishan." So the Rachana says, "What? What's the big deal? Basically, might hava hava. Who cares how it happened? Whatever happened happened." So like what? The guys the Gemara there in Yuma on Hay on the base. So why not have the Gemara say the same thing here and just say, you know. Um, Essentially this kind of a relatively easy question to have a ready answer. But in this situation, these three cases, he didn't know the answer. So the Gemara says, Azov Vishol Ben Midrasha. So Maruk went to go to ask in the base medrash. Which this to me is the most powerful line in this Gemara. One of the most powerful lines in the whole of Tainus. Right? Because essentially what had happened there? Maruk was asked three questions. He didn't know the answers. What did he do? Did he go off and wallow in his misery? In his shame? No. He went to the base medrash and asked the questions over there and see what they said. Right? The Avos Rav Nosson, Aloha Baishin Lomad, right? The person who's going to be too embarrassed to ask is not going to ever become a good learner. Not going to become a great learner. Yeah, it's an amazing midah, right? To be able to push back and fight. If you're going to be too much of a Baishin, you're not going to be able to be successful in learning. Yeah. So again, this is not as we had here in Taanit Zion, Brachas Yud Zion, not Torah Shalosh Shmuel, and that's the content. To fight with people, that's of course not a value. Fine. So Zot the Gemara. So the Gemara now answers. Amrullah, they said to this Medrash, Helchasa, Miss Amelashes. The halacha is that there is a partial fast. Miss Palms, Philistines, and there's what do you call an ability to say Anenu even on a partial fast. And the kankanin of the nachem, the casks of the nachem, after 12 months, they're mutter to be used, right? Even without Mayim. Right? Again, they're doing, as Rashi notes, they're using the kankanim of cheres, presumably in order to be able to hold the wine. If you remember, we had the Gemara before on Zayin Amnaf, Shuman Chananya, about the more handsome the kli, the less it would have been able to be holding the wine. So the first answer to the question of is there tinus for shas? Yes. Do you say anenu? Yes. So now we're up to the second one, which is kankan shal nachem. After 12 months, you don't need to remind him anymore. Whatever the taste is long gone, and it's become worse, if anything, and therefore it would be therefore mutter to use these kankanim without doing any iroi. And then the last question of Ma Allah Shemesha, what did Moshe dress in when he was doing the Shiras Mi'amiluim? Again, maybe we don't really care, but the Gemara nevertheless decides to answer the question and not say who cares. And the Gemara answers, he wore B'cholak Vav, and he wore some sort of a white shirt. That's how he did it. Of Kahana lasted b'chalak lo v'she'en lo imra. And he did some sort of a white shirt that had no hem. Um, Again, the idea of the hen, Rashi points out, is the Visim Lakim Hashem Yisrael, to sort of not arouse any doubts. Remember, they did have doubts about Moshe. V'vita achrei Moshe, some said l'shvach, some said l'gnai. Right, the shvach is Lid Isha becomes this great. The l'gnai is, they thought he was mamish stealing their wives and the like. Yeah. All right, we'll have to stop over here. Have a wonderful day.